Yeah, I said, okay, didn't say ready yet, I said ready.
Are we there or not yet? I'm watching you. Okay. Okay, we're just back from closed session and we're rising out of the closed, and the only thing I have to report is that the mayor will proceed as directed in closed. At this time, we will take, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here too quick. Moved by Councillor Kingma, seconded by Councillor Nordoff, all in favor, and that's carried. We're kind of jumping all around here with the agenda tonight, so it doesn't take much to confuse me. All right, so we're now going to take a brief recess and reconvene at 7 p.m. Could I have a mover and do I need a mover? Yeah, move to go into to have a recess, and Councillor Nordoff, seconded by Councillor McKinnon, all in favor, and that's carried. Thank you. And we'll see you back at 7. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back to our December 12th, or sorry, December 16th meeting. We started the meeting at 6 and went through the agenda, and then we had a closed session and a brief recess so that we could start the Committee of Adjustment on time. So we are at that point in the agenda, item 6. We have a recommendation that council convene as a Committee of Adjustment at 7:01 PM. Moved by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Councillor Kingma. The purpose of the upcoming Committee of Adjustment and public meeting is to provide council, the Committee of Adjustment, and the general public an opportunity to hear from all interested parties regarding the applications being discussed this evening. The public is advised that comments expressed and written material presented are a matter of public record, available for full disclosure. In respect to the Committee of Adjustment application, only the applicant or a public body can appeal a Committee of Adjustment decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This must be filed within 20 days from the date of the decision. In respect to the public meeting application, if a person or public body does not speak to the application at the public meeting or make written submissions to the township, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the council decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal or be added as a party to an appeal of the decision to the tribunal. If you wish to be notified of the decision in writing, please submit a written request to our clerk. So our first application is, and actually our only one under this category, is the application for minor variance A06-2024. The owner applicant is Richard Lumen, and the property in discussion is 25451 Wood Road. And I'll turn this portion of the meeting over to our planner, Ashley Sawyer.
Thank you, Chair Clark. So as noted, the subject lands have a municipal address of 25451 Wood Road and are located on the south side of Wood Road, east of Hansford Road. The lands are irregularly shaped and are approximately 1.28 acres in size, with surrounding uses being predominantly agricultural in nature. The lands currently contain a single detached dwelling, and the owner is proposing to construct a detached garage for personal storage purposes. Relief is required from section 5.1.2, 5.1.3, and 6.2 to facilitate the construction of the garage. So section 5.1.2 requires accessory structures to be located in an interior side or rear yard, whereas approximately 100 square feet of the garage will be located in what is defined as the front yard. This is largely due to the triangular shape of the property. Section 5.1.3 permits for a maximum garage height of 5 meters, whereas 7 meters is proposed, equating to a difference of 2 meters or 6.56 feet. And section 6.2 requires a minimum front yard setback from Wood Road of 30 meters, whereas 26 meters is proposed, which is a difference of 4 meters or 13.13 feet. So the owner has explored alternate locations on the subject property, and I'm just going to pull up the site layout here. But as you can see, due to the location of the single detached dwelling, the existing pond, there is an existing septic system here, as well as existing utility locations. And with the triangular shape of the lot, they are really restricted in where they can put the garage. But generally speaking, no concerns have been noted by the circulated agencies. No comments were received by members of the public prior to the submission of my report. And staff are of the opinion that the proposed variance meets the 4 minor variance tests in the Planning Act, which are outlined in more detail in my report, but can generally be summarized as the garage is not anticipated to negatively impact neighboring properties, the character of the area, the streetscape, and sightlines. So we are recommending that the minor variance be granted with the condition that the relief solely applies to the accessory structure as shown on the site sketch submitted with the application, and that the structure shall be 1 story in height.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Rick, I know you're online. Do you want to make any comments? Or are you comfortable leaving it as it is? Seeing no response, I'll take that as a no. You're good. All right, does council have any questions for Ashley? All right, and anybody in the gallery have any questions? No? All right, then, we have a recommendation that application for minor variance A06-2024 that requests relief from section 5.1.2 to permit a portion of the detached garage to be located in the front yard, section 5.1.3 to permit for a maximum height of 7 meters or 22.97 feet, and section 6.2 to permit for a front yard setback of 26 meters be granted subject to the conditions that Ashley's read out for the reasons that she's included in the report. If there's no further questions or comments, could I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Counselor Kingma, seconded by Counselor Brody. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks. All right, could I have a motion that council adjourn the Committee of Adjustment at 7:06 PM? Moved by Counselor McKinnon, seconded by Counselor Nordoff. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, next up is our public meeting. So we have a recommendation that council convene into public meeting at 7:06 PM, moved by Counselor Brody, seconded by Counselor Kingma. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, next item up is 7.8, an application for zoning bylaw amendment, Z13-2024, temporary use owners Lindsay and Daniel Fitzgerald for 2292 Murphy Drive. And I'll turn this portion of the meeting back over to Ashley again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So just a note to council that the property owner here with us tonight is a County of Middlesex employee, but he is here tonight as a resident and not as an employee of the county. So the subject lands have a municipal address of 2292 Murphy Drive, also known as County Road number 77, and they're located on the north side of Murphy Drive, east of Patterson Drive. The lands are approximately 99.15 acres in size, and surrounding uses are predominantly agricultural in nature. The lands currently contain a single detached dwelling and various agricultural buildings, as well as agricultural lands and crop production. And the purpose of the subject application is to implement a temporary use zoning bylaw to allow the property owners to continue to live in the existing single detached dwelling while a new single detached dwelling is being constructed. The temporary use bylaw would permit for 2 dwellings to be located on the property for a maximum period of 2 years, or upon occupancy of the new dwelling, whichever occurs first. In addition to the passing of the temporary use bylaw, the owners are required to enter into an agreement with the township and provide a security deposit of $10,000 that's returned upon removal of the original dwelling to the satisfaction of the township. No concerns were noted by the circulated agencies or members of the public prior to the submission of my report, and staff are of the opinion that the application is consistent with applicable policies and are recommending that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved and an implementing bylaw be read a first, second, and third and final time this evening, and that the property owners enter into the temporary use agreement with the municipality and post the required security deposit. And we'll just pull up a site sketch for reference here. So the existing house is where my mouse is, and then the new proposed dwelling is just in front of that, so slightly closer to Murphy Drive.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Are there any questions? Dan, did you want to speak to the application at all?
Just here to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for Dan, the property owner? Okay, seeing none then, we have a recommendation that the application for zoning bylaw amendment Z13-2024 be approved and that the implemented bylaw be read a first, second, and third and final time, and further that the property owners enter into a temporary use agreement with the municipality and post the required $10,000 security deposit to ensure the removal of the original single detached dwelling. Ashley's included the reasons in there as well. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Counselor Brody, seconded by Counselor Nordoff. All in favor, and that's carried. Thank you. All right, we have a recommendation that council adjourn the public meeting at 7:09 PM and reconvene into regular session of council. Moved by Counselor Brody, seconded by Counselor Nordoff. All in favor, and that's carried. Thank you. Okay, this is the nitty-gritty part of the meeting, I guess. No offense to everybody else, but we're now going to, yeah, thanks for coming, Ashley. We're now going to deal with item 8, which is the 2025 draft budget presentation. And I will turn this portion of the meeting over to our treasurer, Johnny Pereira.
All right, thank you, Mayor Clark. Through to council, as the mayor mentioned there, we'll be presenting the 2025 draft budget this evening. There have been a number of budget inputs that have come to council, which has led to the development of this budget this evening. The budget working group has also considered numerous options and made recommendation and cuts to the original proposed budget to arrive at the rate we are proposing today. So just going over the agenda here quickly, we'll go over the 2025 budget development process, jump into funding as far as property taxes, the 2025 assessment, and just outlining the reserve strategy. And we'll look at the overall big picture of where we're landing in the year, and then explaining how we arrive at that through the capital budget highlights, the operating budget highlights, and where we sit with reserves and investments at the end of the year. So common questions, what is a budget? Just for the average person in the community, it's a key planning document in achieving the township's strategic priorities. It's just outlining the plan for the upcoming year. The challenge is striving to meet the needs of as many of our residents or customers as possibly in a fiscally responsible way. The process is further complicated where the needs and wants of our citizens are in conflict with one another. There's also frequent misperception of what services are under the control of our level of government and which services are provided by other levels. So Adelaide Metcalfe determines the revenue requirements for the township through budgeting. So we're setting the municipal tax rate. One thing to remember is that when looking at our property tax bill is the distribution of those taxes. So not all of that bill actually stays here in the township. It's only about 51%. So looking at the 2024 distribution, as mentioned, 51% stayed here in the township, where 30% went to the county and 19% going to education. Education, this is based on the various school boards of the school support of each resident in the community. Just want to highlight the burden for unpaid taxes here for a second. So if residents or businesses do not pay their property taxes, although we do have tools to eventually collect that, the burden of unpaid taxes is felt here at the township, as we still have to ensure that the levies are paid to the county and school boards. So it does become a cash flow piece at that point. So going over the budget working group for 2025, the working group was established on July 15th and council appointed 2 members to this group. The overall plan of the working group is to eventually give every member of council an opportunity, if they wish, to be a part of this process. So part of the working group is really to develop a deeper understanding of the development process and the overall methodologies used. Just spurring comprehensive discussions, providing insights and perspectives, and increase the accountability and transparency. So for the 2025 budget working group, it consisted of Councillor Nordoff and Councillor Kingma, in addition to the management team here at the township. So the budget development process, it starts fairly early in July. Process starts really by reaching out for quotes in order to get a zero-based budget. So managers reach out, get that information just as they get their budget models, they can key that in there. We also build the budget survey, and that goes out in August with the tax bills. That has been something that council has brought up in the past, just to ensure that it's communicated through that tax billing process. In August, we kick off budget meetings with managers. Then in September and October, the budget survey was completed and evaluated by staff, and that was presented to council. Budget managers received that information and included that within their budgets. So later on, the process plans did shift a bit from the original proposed plan. But this is one of the benefits of starting the budget process fairly early, is there is room for flexibility. November provided the first iteration of the budget, and it was presented to the budget working group. Draft budget was prepared with the recommendations of the working group. So there was multiple cuts and items presented there and incorporated into the second draft. New information was presented late in November, early December, and this was due to the OPP funding that was received to decrease that large bill we received this year from that service. So in discussions with the working group, we were able to come up with a strategy to revise the original budget that was recommended. So we are here today in December presenting the draft budget. Council has the budget packages they had provided a couple weeks ago to review the details in anticipation of this meeting. Council also had the ability to sit down and with one-on-one meetings with myself to go through details and ask any questions that they do have. So the next step after today would be to either have additional budget deliberation meetings or would be to come back with bylaws for approval. So jumping into budget funding, looking at revenues, it's one of two sides to a budget. We have our revenues and we have our expenses. Municipalities use a wide range of funding sources to pay for programs and services it offers, but most common is property taxes. But some of the other sources of revenue that the township does use is grants from federal and provincial levels. Some of it are predictable funding that we do get every year, but at the same time, we also go after a lot of grants. So the township has been fairly aggressive in going after those. Specifically, this past year, the township was able to land the OTF grant for the Kerwood Park lighting replacement. We also have user fees, some of which are for either Kerwood wastewater services or Center Road water wastewater, in addition to general user fees to cover costs for recreation, planning application, and building permits, for example. Reserve transfers are also another revenue source, and this is really those funds that we put away in savings to eventually use for specific projects. And then there's other miscellaneous revenues such as donations or sale of various equipment. So when looking at the 2025 budget, this slide here just shows the split of the various revenue streams for the year. 70% is coming from taxes, with user fees at 11%, grants at 10%, and other municipal services at 9%. Just highlighting the 9% there, 80% of that is related to interest earnings and investments. So the property tax calculation, which is shown here, this is really how we arrive at the tax bill. So there's two components there. There's the assessed value, and then that's multiplied by the property tax rate. So there's three components as far as there's the municipal tax rate, there's a county tax rate, and the education tax rate. So this calculation is really being repeated 3 times. The key piece to this is the assessed value, and that's determined by MPAC, not the municipality. And this would be the same calculation used across the province. So when touching on the property assessment, this is determined, like I said, by MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. The 2025 assessment has been delivered. We actually just got the paper copies in today. So there was a few delays there from the overall strike and everything. So based on what was communicated to council and the budget working group, there were no changes to the assessment from when I last downloaded it. So that's good. I just want to highlight that the 2025 assessment is still based on those same 2016 values. So there are no updates on when the next provincial reassessment will be. Looks like the province is still looking at that, but more information is to come. So looking at the overall 2025 assessment, we are seeing a 0.83% increase over the assessment from 2024. Typically, this would be a good news story as we're seeing some growth there. But unfortunately, we lost some assessment in residential with the pickup coming in through farm. So how assessments are dealt with, there's a weighting calculation that's used, and that's where ratios come in. So because the farm tax class is 25% of the residential, we actually have a tax shift, meaning that we're losing some taxable assessment. So overall, in layman terms, what this actually means is if the township didn't need to raise a single dollar in 2025, taxes would still need to increase in 2025 because of this tax shift. So this slide here is just a visual, same type of information. It's just showing that the township is heavily rural. About 63% is made up of farm, where 25% is residential. Looking at those other categories there, we do have commercial, industrial. Again, having the benefit of the commercial corridor along Center Road does provide the township with increased commercial and industrial assessment as it gets developed to strengthen that overall assessment base. So this is a chart kind of showing the assessment versus the overall revenue. So a bit of a different picture, and this is where those tax ratios come into play, how there's different weightings based on the different property types. So we can see here where residential in the prior slides showed it was 25% of the total assessment. But when we look at it from a revenue perspective for 2025, it's actually making up about 48% of the total revenues for the year. At the same time, with farm making up about 63% of the total assessment, it's only adding up to about 30% of total revenues for the year. I also just want to highlight commercial and industrial. Even though they're at 4% and 1.4% of the total assessment, it's quite a different picture when you look at the revenues that those property types bring in. So commercial only 4%, but it's bringing in 8.5% of the total revenues, whereas industrial it's only 1.4%, but it's bringing in 4.5%. So there is opportunities there to tap into that. And again, this is just a visual showing the same piece of information, but just in a pie chart. So this chart here is just showing for 2024 that this includes county, school board, and the municipal rate. I usually don't like to include all three in much of my presentation, as council does not have the ability to control county and education tax rates. So I'm typically presenting what council this evening can control. But as you can see here, Adelaide Metcalfe is sitting mid-pack. A lot of the smaller municipalities are on the higher end. And this is just because of the rural nature of the tax base. So Adelaide Metcalfe just sitting just a bit lower than Strathroy-Caradoc there. So as mentioned earlier, tax rates are only half of the overall equation when calculating a tax bill. So assessment values do vary by municipalities. So comparing municipalities by only the tax rate can sometimes be misleading, as there's more to the equation. A municipality that has a stronger industrial or commercial assessment base may fit a bit differently in this chart. So just briefly touching on reserve and reserve funds. These are extremely critical and are aligned to the township's asset management plan and financing strategy. They're important to provide liquidity, cover emergencies, and again, just for effective asset management planning. When you don't have reserves or don't make reserves a priority, overall costs will typically increase as there are contingencies having to be built into the budget. And this can also create year-over-year budget fluctuations. In addition, without reserves, you might see reduction of capital works. For example, if the money is not there, you can't do the work. You end up kicking that project down the road and it would continue to deteriorate. when work may be needed, it might be too much for the tax base to absorb. So by having reserves in place, we're able to save that money up and eventually do that project. And it may not be such a significant tax increase in the year because we've had time to save for that. In addition, reserves provide flexibility. It ensures that the township is not forced to be in a position we don't want to be in. It also allows us to take advantage of joint projects with, say, a neighboring municipality, or take advantage of large grant opportunities that may arise that is not 100% funded. So just quickly distinguishing operating and capital budgets, they both provide for the township's programs and services, but the types of expenditures and sources of revenue do differ. Operating projects provide for more of the annual cost to deliver services, where the capital budget provides for longer term benefits, more than 1 year. So projects can span multiple years. It's for new infrastructure or renewal or refurbishment of infrastructure. So considerations in developing the budget, and this is fairly consistent to prior years as well. It's ensuring transparency, accountability, and incorporating public feedback, and that's through that budget survey exercise. Managing competing priorities, as a budget working group can attest to. There was a lot coming through the pipeline, so it's deciding what is a priority that we want to tackle in 2025. And the ramifications of the continued delay in the property tax reassessment is also a consideration. The aging infrastructure gap, or the aging infrastructure and closing the infrastructure gap. Inflationary pressures, yes, those have started to come down, but there's still a lag there, and those are costs that we're still impacted by. Capital and operating project carry forwards, and the commercial corridor policy alignment. So jumping into the big picture here. So the recommended rate is about 4.66 increase. So the 2025 budget has the fundamental building blocks of a well-considered budget. The 2025 budget addressed increasing costs due to inflation. It maintains the current service levels and allows for significant infrastructure construction and repair, while also exploring the feasibility of future industrial and commercial development to strengthen the township's rural tax base. So now we'll just jump into capital and operating to explain how we arrive at these figures. So 2025, this was the first year we attempted a 10-year capital forecast. So this is at a very high level. We'll be refining these figures as we move forward. So in addition to the 2025 budget there, we do have a forecast ranging from 2026 to 2034. So these are estimates only based on the township's asset management plan. In 2025, there will be we're proposing a roads needs study, and this will further refine some of these projections. So this forecast is used just to show what future costs may look like and ensure we have a financial plan in place to fund these future projects. It is a large value there at $17 million over 10 years. So we do want to make sure we have a plan in place to cover that, so it's not a surprise. I do just want to note that nothing in this forecast is approved. They will all come forward in the year. We are just looking at approving those 2025 projects. So that's the $4.15 million. So this is consistent to 2024. 2024 was also a heavy year for capital, specifically with Mulla Ferry Drive. The year prior in 2023, we were sitting at about $1.8 million. So this is a good visual here over the last 4 years. We can see it kind of spiking here within the last 2024 and 2025. I believe in 2022, we had a break from infrastructure construction because there was a focus at Kerwood Park. But moving to this slide here, this shows just a bit of a different picture. This incorporates the historical, current, and the future forecast. So we can see here, even though 2024 and 2025 here are projecting to be high years, we do see things coming down. which is a good sign. So these are more recovery years from a reserve standpoint. So we anticipate spending less and less in capital as we're going to be catching up. So for 2025, as mentioned, $4.15 million is the recommendation. 76% of that is from Public Works, where 24% of that is fire. So the township is investing or recommending investing significant funds into fire services in 2025 for asset renewal. And this actually aligns nicely with the budget survey, as there was a lot of feedback there about the township's investment into fire services. So this is definitely something that we're highlighting this year. So jumping into Public Works, 2025 is a busy year for construction. So continued focus on Mulla Ferry Drive. So we're looking at Seed Road to Kerwood Road for the 2025 works at a cost of $1.45 million. This was a multi-year project kicked off in 2023. So hoping to close that project this year. Overall, that project projecting to be about $3.125 million. I just want to highlight that prior year, this came in about $3 million. So we are seeing a bit of an increase, about 4%. But those are some of those inflationary pressures that we're talking about that we're having to deal with. In addition to Mulla Ferry, we do have a Scotchmere Drive resurfacing at 204 from Melbourne to Thames Road, and then resurfacing Napier and Arthur at about 84,000, and those are remaining LCB roads just resurface. In addition, for the asset management plan, we do have Buttery Creek subdivision having a full resurfacing projects. So all three of those roads in that subdivision are due for resurfacing. There's also a County Lane resurfacing project and some upgrades on that road for 50,000. And then there is a carry forward project for Catesville Drive Bridge rehab for $313,000. So if you can recall, this was from the 2024 budget. It's been deferred through the OSIM report, which is the Ontario Structure Inspection Manual. That report highlighted the various repairs needed. So Calder's team will be looking to do that project this year. So there's also a tandem snowplow. This has received pre-budget approval granted in August, and that was for $405,000. The original budget report had 416, so we're just aligning that budget to the actual cost of that tender. I believe the delivery is expected in late 2025. There's also a backhoe projected to be replaced, and the 2013 Chevy pickup as well. So with all those costs in Public Works, that's about $3.1 million in 2025. So as far as financing is concerned, we do have some funds remaining in the capital project carry forward reserve. So prior to moving to the new methodology of how we fund reserves now, we had an old can of snowplow. I think we just received in 2024, but that took a few years to come in. So when we raised that in a prior budget, we raised the full value for it. The truck actually came in a bit less than what we raised on taxes. So being fully transparent, since these funds were already raised from the tax base, this is just highlighting that they weren't forgotten about. It's being brought in right now, and we're reducing the overall drawing from the reserve to pay for this new truck in 2025. In addition, there are some development charges being used for Mulla Ferry Drive. That project was highlighted in the DC background study. So there is funding outlined there. And there is some grant funding being used from the Canada Community Building Fund and the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund as well. And majority is falling to the life cycle management reserve fund again, per the asset management plan. There's only one item there falling to the tax levy, and that is the county lane upgrades. So the purpose of the life cycle management reserve fund is for direct replacements. So if there's any additions being completed on a roads project, it in theory can't be funded from life cycle management, or there wouldn't be enough money in that reserve if we start doing all these additions. So that rounds out public works. I guess if there's any questions. Feel free to interrupt as we go.
Are there any questions on that section for Johnny? Counselor Kingma?
Yeah, it's just a curiosity I have here about County Lane. Maybe Coulter can tell me what the upgrades are that we are considering for that road.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kingma. We are considering a few different options, but we are planning on going with hot asphalt, paving that road, as well as doing a turnaround at the end, just to make it a lot safer for fire services and public works department for snow plowing. So it is going to be a little bit more of an upgrade, but definitely a much needed upgrade. And yeah, definitely some drainage works. That's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think the people on County Lane will be ecstatic. So it is much needed and long overdue. So any other questions on that section? No. Sorry, go ahead.
One question, and based on Councillor Kingma's question, we typically put a report together that would outline those works and get the cost approvals from council.
Yeah, absolutely, Morgan. We will do some survey design, come up with a plan and present it to council, and they'll be able to see numbers and whatnot. So everything will come forward.
All right. So moving on to fire services. So also, as mentioned, a heavy year for fire, close to $1 million there. But a large part there is the tanker replacement, which was a 2024 carry forward project. And this is just due to timing of getting this type of specialized machinery in. So that's coming in about 583 for that tanker. A large piece of equipment being recommended this year is the self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA. A key piece to keep our firefighters safe. There are 14 units there looking to be replaced, and these are replacements that are on a fixed schedule to meet, I believe, some fire safety standards there. So in addition to the 14 SCBA units, this upgrade also requires a new fill station air compressor that goes along with these new SCBA units worth 75,000. So that project combined there is about 375, and that also received pre-budget approval late this year. In addition, there is some equipment that the fire team is looking to purchase for about $16,000. Some turnout gear, helmets, hoods, gloves, and boots. And also there is a well and filtration system that fire is looking to replace at the hull there. The current unit is failing, so that is kind of a priority item for the fire hall. So as far as funding this capital, the township has received $65,000 in donations to assist with this critical equipment, these SCBA units. Those donations were received from Sun Canadian Pipeline and ATCO, which definitely helps and reduces the overall reserve draw in 2025. Aside from that, the remaining funds are coming from the life cycle management reserve fund. So overall, this is just a quick summary here of total capital for the year and the funding sources. So as you can see, there's only about $30,000 falling to the levy. All other costs are either coming from reserves or grants. Again, just another visual, just showing the 77% from life cycle management and the rest kind of sprinkled through the other funding sources.
Councillor King, do you have a question? Sorry, Councillor King, do you have a question?
Thank you. I was wondering if there were still some grant opportunities being explored for fire departments, especially the SCBA purchase. I think there's something called a fire protection safety grant. I forget if that's exactly what it's called, but have we looked into that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Kima, maybe I'll speak on the first half, and if Dan's aware of any other ones, I may pass over to him as well. But I know we are still looking at some of the other wind turbine companies, specifically NextEra. I know they've shown some interest in providing some funds for this equipment. We're just communicating back and forth and waiting really for that final approval of those funds. They are from Florida, so there's some additional approvals that are needed to send funds across the border. So I know that avenue is being looked at, but I'm not sure if Dan's aware of the other items.
Yeah, Garrett, Councillor Garrett. I was in a county chiefs meeting today and one of the advisors there from OFM mentioned we had previously applied for a fire protections grant. And I was told today that Christmas is coming and that everyone that applied for this grant will be getting their minimum amount. So we applied for approximately, it was between $8,000 and $10,000. So we allocated it for PPE for the firefighters. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other, is that it for your fire? Or you're being interrupted, you actually, so, you're good? Okay.
All right, so that concludes the capital components. So next section would be looking at the 2025 operating highlights. So just going over the operating framework, how we arrive at the operating budget. So there's multiple steps here. So typically what we do, step one is looking at costs required to maintain existing service levels. So we're looking at salaries, looking at inflationary increases, utility, contracted services, and then we're reducing any cost savings through the year that we've realized. Next item we look at are mandatory or legislative costs. So for example, conservation authorities that are passed down to us, something that we just need to absorb. The third step is the annualization. Were there any programs or anything implemented in the prior year, then now we have a full annual cost we have to realize. For example, in the prior year, I know Public Works implemented a new road patrol application. So there was the implementation year, and then the following year, there's the annual fees that we now need to consider in the budget. Step 4 looks at growth. Again, there has been minimal growth in the townships, nothing really to look at there, but a large growing municipality may need to increase certain, whether it's staff or whatnot, in order to just maintain that same service level to meet the demand of growth. Then step 5 looks at enhancements. So if there are new services or if council would like to enhance various service levels, that would be another addition to the budget to consider. So overall highlights or impacts that affect multiple departments. This is just a high level. So as highlighted earlier, there's no change to the property assessment. So there's no phase in growth. We do have some loss of residential assessment due to the farm tax rate changes. So we've seen this over the last couple of years. This is that phantom assessment, I would say. So it's those properties that switch from farm to residential, then back to farm. So the township has implemented a communication strategy So we send out letters to residents that we do see that are changing and just let them know that this has happened. Typically, the change happens when there's a name change or there's a sale of a property, it defaults to residential. But in addition to that, MPAC has also made a change on their end as well. So they've changed their process there to minimize this kind of flip-flop between the farm and residential. Being a rural municipality, it does affect us significantly. In addition, OMPF, OCIF, those reports have came to council a while ago there. We are seeing increases this year, which is great. Cost of living has been applied to all compensation programs. That's staff, fire, and council at 2%. Conservation authorities, we have seen increase about 3.6. Insurance, seeing about 9% increase. This is not final. This was the last communication I've had with Intact Insurance. As far as the wheelie bin program there, automated garbage pickup and disposal, we're seeing a CPI increase of about 1.6%. So that's not the only cost that's applied. There's also the average volume of garbage or waste that we're disposing. So there's more than just the 1.6 that's considered. And then across the board, there's the CPI increase of 1.9 that we have been experiencing from September Q3 to Q3. In addition, there was a staff compensation market alignment implementation. So that is effective January 1. So that was also built into the budget. Development charge top up due to the remaining phase in of those DC charges. The province has since removed the phase in approach, but there were a few DCs that have to be topped up because there's a shortfall, and per the Development Charge Act, any shortfalls can't be made up through future development charges. And then there's a potential Ontario Land Tribunal hearing, as well as a Center Road servicing dispute. So the operating budget here, this just goes through each department. So we'll be going through each of the departments in detail of explaining how we arrive at the percentage changes year over year. So overall, we're looking at a 3.84% increase from an operations standpoint over 2024. Keep in mind that we're also looking to raise $30,000 from the tax base from capital this year as well. So those two combined will end up being the total levy increase, which translates to the tax rate. So through this exercise, departments have found opportunities for cost savings and efficiencies. We're still able to offer the same level of services in this budget today. The first iteration presented to the budget working group for operating was a 14.64 levy increase or a 14.8% tax rate. So there were significant cuts to get to the 3.84% where we land today. This is just a pie chart showing the operations by service area. Keep in mind the general government in this pie chart here is making up 44%. It's a bit misleading just because the future reserves allocations or transfers there are housed in general government. So I've reworked this. So this is what more you would expect. So if we look at the current operations of the township in 2025 and backing out those future savings, we can see that public works is making up 38% of the budget, which you would expect. So just going over personnel changes. So just being fully transparent, a labor model was used in 2025. So this gets into the details of each individual to calculate what those wages are going to look like in the coming year. So as mentioned, 2% cost of living increase to all compensation programs. Benefits are estimated at about 5% increase. As mentioned, the staff compensation program received a 2024 market alignment. but this was fully reserved for in 2024. Public Works overtime is budgeted at 7.5%, consistent to 2024 as well. WSAB, we actually saw a rate decrease for 2025 to 3.09 from 3.25. And as discussed earlier in the staff reports, there is a part-time drainage superintendent added to be conservative to provide the township flexibility in that regard. So jumping into the first department is administration. Administration is seeing a 6% increase over 2024, or about $53,000. There are 6 full-time staff in this department. The significant factor here, what makes up the majority of the increase here, is the decrease in interest rates and our overall bank balance. So we are seeing about $34,500 of lost revenue due to the falling interest rates and decreased bank balance, and that makes up 65% of that difference right there. OCIF also falls to this department as well, but it is zero impact as that revenue comes in and transfers out to those reserves. Another impact here is the Keystone ERP end of life reserve contribution. So Keystone is the township's main financial system. And there has been significant conversations had at the municipal finance conference and the local treasurers group in the county about this reaching end of life. So the township is relatively small. This is not something that we would really be looking to entertain of getting a new system, but because there's an end of life risk, it's something that the township we should be kind of aware of and putting money aside for when that date comes, so it's not a surprise. So we are recommending about $25,000, and that was actually a slight reduction from the working group because it was originally proposed at 50, so we cut that in half. There's also a proposed financial budget software for.
Or just to jump in terms of that Keystone software upgrade, I think the treasurers group and local municipalities have also challenged the county IT department to find a collaborative solution to help reduce some of these costs, because that will be a significant burden for small municipalities to realize. It's not like we're buying a fire truck or a snowplow. It's a piece of software, so it's something that we don't typically see.
Yeah, great point. And just, I forgot to add the cost overall to that. So some of the costs that were kind of tossed around was a $300,000 to $400,000 price tag for that new system. So if there are cost saving opportunities due to our size, it's definitely something that we might want to explore.
They have to.
Yeah. So jumping into financial budget software was proposed for this year. So currently, this whole budget process is done in Excel, which is very inefficient and prone to errors. So it's time-consuming process. We start in July, like I mentioned. So through budget software, there are a number of operating efficiency to be realized. Again, being a small team, finding efficiencies can be very helpful. The software also provides a number of opportunities to increase transparency with a public-facing budget component, a budget book reporting studio to help clean that process up, and additional reporting tools to be used day to day by all the managers in the township as well. This also provides the township with the ability to develop multi-year budgets with allocation and automation tools. So once we have a few of our items cleaned up within the township, this might be something that we want to get into as multi-year budgets. I know I've heard about it from council in the past. So this could be a tool that we could use for that. And this is not something specific to Adelaide Metcalfe. Most of the municipalities in Middlesex County have already implemented this system and are slowly starting to see the efficiencies from that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just to jump in on this one, this piece of software doesn't not only open up a bunch of Johnny's time that we'll need for some of the future financial analysis in terms of our industrial lands conversations and other key projects. But it also provides department heads with a greater level of insight into their operational spending, where they're at in the year, so on and so forth. So it will create efficiencies, not just within finance, but across all departments that utilize finance services.
So with that, it does come at a cost. So there's two components. There's the implementation fee and an annual subscription fee. So implementation is landing at about 14,500 with the annual subscription fee at $24,500. Because the township has been fairly conservative with their modernization reserve funds, there are funds still available. And the recommendation would be funding this project with all of those funds is 100%. And there's still more remaining there as shown on the reserve fund schedule. There would be, however, an annual subscription that would have to be incorporated into the 2026 budget. So when we were talking about the budget framework, this is that step 3 of the annualization, is incorporating that annual cost into the 2026 budget. So just something for council to consider. Accounts payable workflow project is also something being worked on. It's a carry forward project. This is just digitizing the accounts payable process. This was built in 2024 due to just the seasonality of the finance department and the budget process. The implementation will likely be slated in 2025 after the budget process and year end is complete. And this is in collaboration with county IT to roll this out. In addition to administration, as mentioned, the commercial quarter policy realignment is still active. Continuation with the official plan review and update. Policy or corporate policy manual, continuing on with that exercise. And there are some remaining drain billing to be completed in 2025 as well. Records management review, the farm tax residential proactive communication strategy, continuing with that to inform residents of those changes. And as always, reviewing operational accounts for savings. So jumping into the tax revenue and reserve transfers departments. So we are seeing a decrease of about 7.6% or about $66,000. And this part of this decrease is due to the tax incentive approvals of $10,000. So through the exercise of reviewing those properties that kind of go back and forth between residential and farm, and with MPAC's change to minimize these issues, we are comfortable with reducing that budget allotment by $10,000 this year. So that definitely helps the bottom line. In addition, we did raise funds last year in 2024 for the market alignment impact. Not all of that was going to be used in 2025. So there are some funds left over. So it was a recommendation of the working group to not only fully cover the impacts of the new grid, but realize the remaining savings in 2025 to help out the overall tax rate in the year. OMPF, we've also received increased funding in 2025 by $26,600, which is a direct benefit to operations. So there was also a net increase to reserve transfers of about $13,000. So this is again asset management planning and the financial strategy. So there's a total transfer of about $1.27 million going towards that. And then there's about $9,700 for the development charge top up. And those are the remaining phase and exemptions. So if you recall last year, I believe that was $20,000 for the exemptions there. So jumping into economic development, this is a new department for 2025. And this was added just to provide transparency in the township's economic development investments. So We did reclass a few items. The community improvement plan was in administration in 2024, but with the development of this department, we were able to shift that program to be housed in in the economic development department, just to capture all that investment. So the budget includes a $10,000 allocation for that program again, funded through unused 2024 CIP allocation. And that was one of the recommendations of the working group this year. But the large piece to the spending in this department is the industrial lands feasibility study, just shy of $132,000. So this is just developing a comprehensive roadmap for infrastructure and industrial land development. So this includes a market study to outline the types of industrial uses that could be brought into the area and understand the market attractiveness of the areas in the township. There's also a technical study component to understand the available utilities in the area, as well as a roadmap of future investment activities. So this is just outline some next steps and the municipal infrastructure planning and design. So next department is council, seeing a slight increase of about 2.1% there, just shy of $2,500. As mentioned, COLA has been applied. You'll see council grants here about $7,000. This is a bit of a change from accounting from prior years. We are incorporating the in-kind and monetary grants now. There is a cost to in-kind contributions. So you'll also notice later in the presentation that the Parks and Recreation will show revenue over there. Where this is just the offset for the in-kind contributions being a cost to council. Within the department includes various conferences. There was a slight reduction there. Again, recommendation from the working group just to cut some of that budget to align with actual spending. Legal fees has been added for 2025 just as a contingency and continuing with the reserve contribution for the 2026 election. Jumping into the planning department, we are seeing an increase of about 37%, or sorry, a decrease of 37% or $28,000. So this service is provided by Middlesex County. Our new planner, Ashley Sawyer, has replaced Erin, so she'll be with us going forward. From planning fee revenue, it's fairly consistent to 2024. We do have a disposition of surplus lands incorporated in the budget, but those net proceeds would be transferred to reserve. So if that happens in 2024 or not, or 2025 or not, there would be no impact to the budget. A future report would be brought forward to council of how to address those surplus lands and how to appropriately account for them when it's time. There's also a request for review and a potential OLT hearing. There's a cost of $70,000 falling there. In 2025, the legal reserve is not being used as it was in 2024.
Excuse me, Johnny, just for anybody watching for clarity, when the municipality filed for the review, I believe it was like $500. It wasn't 70,000. The 70 would be if we're granted the review, and then there would be a new hearing on that, just for clarity.
Yes, and the remaining component for planning there is continuing with the official plan review and update, and that's included in the county levy. Next up is cemeteries. Practically a zero change here from 2024. Continuing to receive interest income, thus offset some of those expenses. Grass cutting is being completed internally by our public works staff. We just implemented a UKG payroll system, so we're just trying to iron out some of the details for the allocation of those costs. And then we're looking at improving the cemetery program as a whole, updating a fee schedule, bylaw procedures, and continuing scanning those records. So jumping into the fire department, overall, the department is seeing an increase of about 12.5% over 2024. From motor vehicle collision revenue, fairly consistent at 2024. So keeping that at $25,000. As mentioned, 2% cost of living has been applied to staff and the firefighter point allocation pool. So in 2025, that allocation pool is now just shy of $101,000. There is a new mental health wellness program proposed, costing about $5,000, and this program is a common program among other fire departments for PTSD prevention. There are some miscellaneous equipment being proposed, just shy of $10,000, and there is a small increase of $7,600 or 23%. To fleet operations. And this relates to just fuel, aligning that with actuals. And there are pump tests to be completed in 2025. So my understanding is pump tests are completed every other year. So this is the year that we have to do that. So slight increase to fleet. But the majority of the increase for fire services actually results from the mandatory firefighter training process. So the 2025 budget includes about $34,000 in training. So this includes the cost of attending the courses as well as the time for the firefighters to attend these courses. In addition to that, there is we are working on the automatic and mutual aid plans to be updated in the year as well. So another new department for 2025 is emergency operations. Again, very small dollar here, only $2,000, but this is just to track emergency management related spending. So it's kind of more preventative, or just in an emergency situation, we may need to start tracking these costs, as there may be reimbursements or cost recovery from upper levels of government. So being able to track these costs and be set up for that will put us in a position down the road if an event does happen. So due to the emergency management exercise that we had late this year, there were a few items that were highlighted. So this just provides a budget line for us to look into purchasing a few items for that, specifically privacy curtains, possibly, and some ready-to-eat meals in case of any emergencies in the township.
I think Councillor Kingma might have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Clerk. It's quite common for a municipality to be reimbursed by an upper tier government if there's been an emergency, correct? So how much are we going to devote to, I guess, purchases for this department if we're likely to be reimbursed? I don't want to be too presumptuous, but
I was just gonna say, but we have the initial outlay until we get the dollars recovered. It's nice to, because if it was a lag, if it took a year and a half, I don't know how long it takes, but it's prudent to have something budgeted, I would think, but that's just my comment.
Through the mayor to Councillor Kingma, just if I could add to it, I think it is presumptuous for that funding. In some cases, we know of municipalities that have applied that haven't received money. There are a lot of those act of God scenarios that they'll pay for, but not everything. So.
And just correct me if I'm wrong, I believe when COVID came through, there was an opportunity where municipalities were tracking some of their lost revenues or costs. And there was some provincial funding that came through for that. So there would be an opportunity just to highlight what we're losing out on and through this department. So. So jumping over to policing. So we are seeing a decrease in policing now at about 2.85% or $13,000. A bit of a different picture from the report that was brought to council in October. So OPP is a contracted service for the township. So that contract in 2025 came in at about $534,000. Due to significant pressures from municipalities across the province. The province has provided funding to help offset these increases at just shy of $88,000 for the township. So this is one of the main reasons why we're seeing a decrease in policing in 2025 now. This does present a risk for 2026, however. So if this funding is a one-time type revenue, there is a possibility of a significant increase in 2026 that the township would need to absorb in that budget. In addition to policing, there is a new OPP detachment board as well. And this is new for 2025, fairly small budget of about $1,100 there. And this is based on the detachment board allocation methodology for the township.
Johnny, before you flip the page there, just for council's information, some municipalities are, like in our case, you see the 77 of the grant. They're only putting in half of that in their budgets because they're expecting a lift, but some of our neighboring municipalities, the number's not 77, it's significant. So they've worked through their numbers and that was their decision, just as an FYI.
That concludes OPP. So jumping into the conservation authorities. So as mentioned earlier, we are seeing an increase there with 3.64%. So these are costs that are passed down to municipalities that we do need to absorb. So the township does have two conservation authorities within our borders, being Assapo Bayfield and St. Clair. So looking at Assapo Bayfield, we are seeing a 3.15% increase over 2024, and this does include Category 3 programming as well. Just over the past few years, since 2021, we have seen this levy increase by 12.3%. Looking at St. Clair, it's about 4.14% increase over 2024, and this does not include any Category 3 programming. Bit of a different picture since 2021. That levy has increased by 45%. So building services, we're seeing no impact to the tax levy from building services, as this is a cost neutral department. So any surplus or deficit is transferred to and from the reserve fund. So building is also a contracted service with our friends at Middlesex Center. So since this contract is now at a fixed rate, the township would still be responsible for building service costs, even if there is no permit income in the year. So this is the purpose of the building. This is the purpose of the building reserve under the Building Code Act, to ensure that it's self-funded and it's not subsidized by the general tax base. After some discussion with the chief building official, he is projecting a 16% increase to building permit fees for 2025, and that's just aligning with the current trend and the new fee bylaw as well. The cost for the services with Middlesex Center is approximately $90,000. This does equate to about a 20% increase over the prior year. But just note that there is a 5% contingency built into that $90,000, and this is to account for mileage that is outside of the agreement. So overall, the building department is ending in a surplus of about $15,310, and that would go towards that building stabilization reserve fund, as any surplus deficit does not fall to the general tax base. So jumping into bylaw enforcement, building off our successful partnership in building services, the township has recently entered into an agreement with Middlesex Center to provide bylaw enforcement services. The overall department increase is directly related to a 2025 property standards project and various bylaw issues, and that was discussed in the earlier council report this evening. So this is one of the main reasons why we are seeing a $24,000 increase over 2024. We are projecting to have a bylaw program review done in 2025. That's including reviewing policies and ticketing and et cetera. So Mike will be working likely with Arnie and his team at Middlesex Center to do that review. Animal control services, we are looking at a 10% increase. Again, percentages do look much higher than what the actual dollars are. It's only about $558 there. The main reason for this increase is there is a slight decrease in dog tags, but it also incorporates a 2% increase in the Humane Society services per that agreement. As far as billing, that will be advertised on social media to inform the public that a dog tag is required in the township. Those are billed in April and due at the end of May. I just wanted to highlight that the current agreement with the Humane Society is set to expire in September. Therefore, a report would likely come before council in 2025 with animal control agreement options.
Can I just jump in real quick? So talking about cats in Kerwood, the Humane Society, and the increase to by law enforcement budget, we're still working with the Humane Society to understand what a potential increase in scope would cost. That's why you're seeing a budgeted amount in the bylaw area, building on this contract. And then we'll have a new contract year in 2025 with the Humane Society, just to kind of connect some of those dots together, coming back to the Kerwood issue.
As we're jumping into parks and recreation, specifically Kerwood Park. So we are seeing a decrease about 7.9% or $3,000. And this is mainly due to the increase in rental revenue to align with the actuals that we receive and the in-kind grant contributions as well, mainly from Kerwood Optimist Club. Grounds maintenance continues to be completed in-house by Public Works staff. 2025 marks the 100th anniversary of Kerwood Park. So festivities are to be planned, and $5,000 has been allocated for this event in the year. This can be fully offset by some of the remaining funds in the Mar for Mayor Reserve funds. So there would be no impact to the tax base for these activities. There's also plans to continue with the Richardson Tree Program, which is fully funded by reserves. So this is a generous donation that the township received many years ago for hard maple trees. This has been a very popular program in the past, selling out very, very quickly. So looking at the road departments, overall, we're seeing a less than a 1% increase over 2024. So Public Works continues to tighten up their budget over the last few years while still without impacting any service levels. This is our largest department, making up the majority of the operating budget. So this department includes 6 staff, again, COLA being included there 2%. They are doing a lot of in-house work now with grass cutting and some winter snow clearing, specifically at the fire hall this year as well to decrease that cost. As mentioned earlier, overtime is set at about 7.5%, which is seems to be working over the last few years due to the mild winters that we've been experiencing. But due to having a winter maintenance reserve and sitting pretty healthy there, if we do have any extreme weather events, we do have the ability to pull from that. So we're ensuring that we're not overtaxing the community when we have reserves. So that's that discussion of removing the contingencies out of the budget. So overall, as far as the road network and what Public Works looks after, there's some stats listed there. As far as 2025 is concerned, dust control is consistent to 2024, so we're not seeing an increase in that line item. Same with hard top and loose top maintenance, consistent to 2024, and I believe that's at $270,000. Winter sand and salt, projecting a decrease about 22%, sorry. So that's a $20,000 decrease to the budget. So sitting at 70 from 90. A new program that Public Works is looking to implement in 2025 is the culvert replacement program for a total of $30,000. So this is a $15,000 increase over the 2024 budget. And this is to look at inspecting and replacing some road crossing culverts that are not covered within the OSIM report. So I know Coulter did mention this at prior council meeting to look into this to minimize any road washouts and being proactive from the township standpoint there. Staff is looking at grant funding for this, as this is a multi-year project. Intact Insurance currently has a grant opportunity open, and it closed at the end of January. So we are looking at being aggressive on that one to see if we can land some grant dollars to help this program out. Another significant cost that's falling in Public Works is significant drain maintenance through the Drainage Act. So multiple drains have been coming forward for 2025 works that the township has road crossings in those engineers' reports, and we have significant cost apportionments coming our way. So we are estimating about $140,000 that will be hitting the township for township roads, which is significant. But through the drain review project, we were able to utilize $120,000 from that to help offset this project. So in addition to the 140 less the 120, so there's $20,000 remaining, and I believe that amount was part of the 2024 budget already. So overall, by utilizing reserves here, there would be no impact to the general tax base in 2025 with that strategy. Continuing with roads, as mentioned, a road patrol app that has the annual fee there. Sidewalk winter maintenance decrease of about $10,000. This was a recommendation from the budget working group, again, due to the mild winters that we're experiencing. Again, highlighting the fact that we do have that winter maintenance reserve fund that we can pull from if need be. We do have the roads need study. It's carried forward from 2024. Included in the budget for $50,000, and that's partially funded by modernization. And then there's a focus on staff training as well in 2025, being road school and backhoe training. So looking at Public Works fleet, we are seeing an increase here of about 26% or $43,000, even though fuel is projecting to decrease by 4%. We're looking at Mac 3 maintenance to increase. That truck has seen significant maintenance over the last couple of years, and it is slated for replacement. But the biggest reason for the increase in fleet is because of a decision made in 2024, really, by realizing the proceeds of disposition last year. So last year was a tough year as well. But because we have less proceeds of disposition in 2025, because that was a one-time funding, it becomes a shortfall in 2025 here. So for future practice, I'll likely recommend that we don't realize proceeds of disposition in the budget, that those would be directly transferred to reserves, and that just helps minimize and smooth out the tax rate year over year. So jumping into waste and recycling. So 2025 marks the first year that the wheelie bin program is at full cost recovery. So we are seeing 100% reduction in operating costs there over last year. So the proposed wheelie bin fees, we are seeing a 3.9% increase. Again, small typo on the report presented to council earlier today. That fee bylaw should have highlighted a 3.9% increase over the 2024 fees. So that is what has been reflected in the 2025 budget to get us to full cost recovery. BRA, from a cost perspective, they're increasing their waste management disposal and automated fees by 1.6%. But the biggest reason for getting to cost recovery is the recycling moving to a producer pay. 2025 will be the first year that we have the full year of being a producer pay system. So about $31,000 is falling off the books here because of producers paying for recycling. So overall, we're landing at practically full cost recovery. $3 surplus is more of a rounding issue in my books. So seeing full cost recovery is great there for waste and recycling. Moving over to landfill, we are seeing a 39% increase or $29,000 there. From a revenue perspective, we are seeing a slight decrease from 2024. So 2025 is just aligning with that trend. So per the post-closure liability report, we do have approximately 2.5 years left of capacity at the current landfill site. So included in this budget is proposed landfill expansion and topographic survey of about $28,000. So Coulter will be looking into this expansion, and if this is something council would like to explore, a future council report would come forward outlining options, timelines, and associated costs for this project. And continuing with prior years, we're reserving, or the budget working group is recommending reserving $20,000. It was 25. This was, again, a reduction per the working group, understanding the potential future expansion of the site. So overall, the landfill is we're projecting an operating loss of about just shy of $105,000 in 2025. And it's not necessarily uncommon to see a landfill or transfer station operating at a loss, so that's more of a service to the community. Kerwood wastewater, we are seeing an increase in 2025 due to some maintenance works slated there. So about 23.63% increase or $21,000. And this work is outlined per Aqua, who maintains the system there. So there is a system flush, cleaning tanks at the plant, and a new pump being purchased. And that's the total cost of $17,000. There's a slight increase to the operating fees that was outlined in the fee bylaw presented earlier tonight. And that's just adding cost of living or CPI there of 1.9%. In addition, there is a rate study included here. This has kind of been pushed from prior years, as there is some efficiencies to be had by doing the rate study at the same time with Center Road. So that's kind of been delayed until we get that cleaned up. In addition to that, continuation with the life cycle management reserve contribution of $66,775 for the asset management plan. So overall, we are seeing a department deficit there of just shy of $114,000. So moving to Center Road, there's a decrease there of about $35,000 or just shy of 33 or 35% or $33,000. So there are a number of prior year carry forward projects listed that do not have a budget impact, as these were raised in prior years and held in the operations reserves. Keep in mind, many of these items are dependent on the outcome of the servicing agreement. So overall, we're looking at a department deficit of just shy of $61,000 there. And our last department is drainage services, seeing a increase there of about 37% or $12,000 as outlined in the drainage superintendent report this evening. Southwest Middlesex has terminated drainage superintendent services at the end of 2024. So to provide the township with flexibility and applying a conservative cost estimate, a part-time employee has been used to determine the 2025 budget figure. So that includes a 20-hour per week position. And this allows the township the flexibility from using a firm and to pivot to a part-time position if need be there. And also just to highlight through OMAFA, which is the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. They do provide about 50% back in a drainage grant on the eligible hours of the superintendent. So in looking at the township costs, 95% actually can be lumped into these 8 categories here. So about 32% of the township costs fall into transfers to reserves. And that's just really setting money aside for the future. 1.2 million of that is through life cycle management for the asset management plan. There's 388,000 from interest, and then there's grant funding in there as well. Wages and benefits, it's not uncommon to see this as a top expense for a municipality, as they're the ones doing the work. And then subcontract as about 24%. And this can be made up really through policing is the majority right there, $534,000. BRA, $170,000. Building services through Middlesex Center, 90. The feasibility study for industrial feasibility study, 132,000. Animal control, bylaw services. You can see how some of these start to add up. And then we round out through repairs and maintenance and so forth to make up the 95% of the township expenses. So that concludes the operating components. So we're getting to the end here. So just quickly touching on the 2025 reserve and reserve funds.
Before you get into the reserves, is there any questions on anything so far? Councillor McKinnon?
Through you, Mayor Clark, to Johnny. The per diem that the council and the works, I believe, $150, and yet fire is only $100.
Are you referring, sorry, to the mayor, to Councillor McKinnon, are you referring to like council specific or?
I'm referring to council roads and for 3 days, up to 3 days for food, right? And I believe road is the same. And the fire, Dan had. It's not a big deal.
For sure. No, great question. And if that's based on some of the notes that are listed there. So some of those are not necessarily based on any strict amount. They're based on some projections based on maybe where they're going. So if they're going to Toronto, or if they're going somewhere local, that cost could differ. I know council is more of a prescribed rate there. Whereas from staff and fire, we just plug those numbers in so we can arrive at somewhat of a concrete number just to understand what those individual days. So if someone's going to a 4-day conference, it's just so we can kind of arrive at a specific value. So I know sometimes people just put a fixed number down for a budget where I like to construct that number, kind of put together a methodology to arrive at a total figure to go to a conference or go to training. But definitely something we can look at for fire though, to make sure that is consistent. But I don't think necessarily they're restricted at that value. That's just trying to arrive at a budget figure. Okay. So jumping into reserve and reserve funds. So this first part is the reserve projections. So this is just providing, as mentioned earlier, increased transparency. So a lot of these items were operating or capital projects that were not completed in prior years. So this just outlines that these funds were raised on taxes. These funds were parked in a reserve and then eventually to be used when we're planning to do that project. So all those projects are built into the 2025 budget. So that's why we're ending the year with 0 there. If a project is again not completed, we won't draw from this reserve and it will sit there to be used in the 2026 budget. So this slide here highlights all of our reserve funds. There is a lot listed there, and in your notebook in front of you there has those details. But we're sitting at about projecting $7.3 million at the end of 2025. But the key reserve listed there is the Life Cycle Management Reserve Fund, as that's tied to the asset management plan. So we're projecting to end the year at $3.2 million. A key piece in this schedule here is just highlighting the total contributions and withdrawals. You can see here that we're drawing $1.8 million more than we're contributing to our reserves. So obviously continuing with this approach, things won't last long with what's in those reserves there. But you'll see in the coming slides, this is the reason why we do forecasting to ensure that our financial strategy is matching what our future spending is looking like. So through the life cycle funding analysis here, we are seeing that we are depleting our life cycle management reserve fund in the coming years, 2028 dropping fairly low there. But we do have some recovery years to come. So earlier in the presentation, we did talk about capital and how we have a couple heavy years here, and then capital is dropping off. So this is where our life cycle management reserve fund will start to recover. So we'll be spending less than what we're contributing. And this is where we build that reserve back up. So this is a nice chart to see here. So you can see we're drawing significantly from the reserve here. So come 2028 is kind of our low point, and then 2028 to 2034 is when we drastically ramp up that reserve based on the current capital forecast. So part of the forecast is also cash flow planning and forecasting, and this has been paying off for the township this year. So we were able to lock into high interest rates because of the forecast and because of cash flow planning. So we're able to understand when the timing of our capital outflows are. So in late 2023, we were able to lock into a 2-year GIC and an 18-month GIC at much higher interest rates than what's offered today. So based on our rates that we receive through our financial institution, we earn prime less 1.5%. So as of today, our interest rate's 3.95. So because of that strategy we entered into in 2023 and understanding what those future cash outflows are going to look like. So we were already looking at what 2025 cash outflows are going to be. By locking into those reserves and not just keeping those funds in our bank account, we were able to realize and generate an additional almost $102,000 for the township by doing that, because it's a significant pickup in those GIC interest rates versus what our bank rate is, which was past practice. So this is a direct benefit here of cash flow planning and long-term forecasting. It allows us with this ability to pick up this interest earnings that would otherwise have to be funded by the general tax base. So this is not only finding ways to cut costs, but being able to find some other sources of revenue as well. So overall, this is the summary again, looking at a 4.66% tax rate increase. The overall municipal budget is falling at $11.56 million for 2025. So sometimes looking at these tax rates can be difficult for the average homeowner to understand. So this slide just highlights what this translates to in dollars. So from MPAC, they actually determine what an average assessment is for residential and for farm. So the change from 2024 to 2025 for an average assessment of $290,000. For the municipal tax increase would be about $100 or $834 a month. So that's equivalent to about Tim Hortons coffee per week. Starbucks would be a bit more. For farm, looking at an $800,000 assessment, farm would be increasing by $69 for the year, or $5.75 per month. So overall, this concludes the presentation. So for members of the public, more than welcome to reach out to me with questions on this presentation this evening, but happy to answer any questions from council.
So, just for the public's information and to reiterate what Johnny said, we did have two counselors, Counselor Nordoff and Counselor Kingma. They joined the budget working group this year. Last year, it was Counselor McKinnon and myself. And, but everybody around the horseshoe here has had the opportunity to go in individually, and whether it be email or in person, to ask Johnny specific questions on the budget. It's not the first time council has seen like the pretty presentation is the first time we saw that, and it's great. But the meat and potatoes, we've already had a good look at those and had an opportunity. However, having said that, from the presentation tonight, maybe there's something that sparked your interest and you have a question. So I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, but if you do, now would be the time. Or to Johnny's point, if you want to sleep on it and you think of something and you want to reach out, I think tonight we're just receiving the budget, and then we'll look to approve it at the next council meeting if there's no issues with it. So, Councillor Kingma?
Thank you. It's a lot of amazing work, Johnny. Really appreciate this. I have a hope that we'll start the Adelaide shop expansion in 2026. I think it's slated for 2027. Can we start earlier, and what are the implications? And what does Coulter think?
Through Mayor Clerk to Councilor Kingma, maybe I'll answer part one and then I'll pass it off to Coulter for part two. From a high level, I would have to run some numbers, as there will be cash flow factors that has to be considered. There are some tight years there. So it's just understanding by pushing that forward an extra year, what does that do overall, as we'll be losing some interest earnings by spending money sooner. So we'll have to see how that shapes the life cycle management reserve fund, but I can definitely look into that so we can have some concrete numbers to see if that's feasible. But as far as Coulter's side of the actual works itself, I'll pass that over.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kingma. To reiterate what Johnny said, I think the original plan a few years back was to maybe tie into that shop in 2026, but due to financial reasons, we did end up pushing it just to give us a little more time to kind of wrap our head around, response times, Napier shop, other properties that are municipal owned. So I think by pushing it, I think it's a good move. It gives us more time to look at everything as a whole and come back to council with some different options, I guess. And Morgan and I have talked about this quite a bit in the last 6-8 months.
Yeah, just to build on what Coulter's saying, if we had computer modeling for response times, roads, travel, gas consumption, employee time to travel between places, we could probably expedite this project, but we don't have that computer modeling. We don't have that capability. So trying to do this project in-house, we need to build data sets that we can look at. And that's what Coulter's doing through his road patrol app. So if we're giving us staff a little bit more time, then we can do this probably 99% in-house. If we want to expedite this work, then we should probably look at bringing in some kind of a firm that would help us do the computer modeling to deal with some of those questions that we just don't have answers to.
And I think you're going to collect the data. It's very important, because then you'll be able to actually ascertain what we need and where we need it. Then, like you said, response times and look at different options. Mike, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to chime into through Sue to Boulder. I would really like to see, and I mean, I don't think we need to hire an outside source. I think this is stuff we can do on our own, watch our costs, but I really want to get a feel for how much that neighbor property shed is worth to disperse of, and maybe even the Napier one. I truly believe now with the equipment that we have, everything's new, trucks are new, graders are new. Like we have top of line equipment. Do we need that old township office on the other side of the township anymore? I think there's real estate value in both places. Look at real estate value to put into a project here. I think we have the room here if it's done right. The old days of old equipment and small equipment, I could see where you have, you know, maybe some response time issues. It doesn't take that long to leave here and drive a snowplow to the other end of our township. We're not that far away. I mean, the county will do it miles and miles and miles and miles farther than we have to even think about. So I think that's one thing I really want to see when we do go forward with this.
And Morgan?
The only other question we have about those two properties is, they could be brownfields based on gas and oil leaking into the ground. So there'd be a phase one, assessment for sure. And likely a phase two for some form of remediation. So it actually might bring or squish those revenues from the disposition of those lands to be quite small. So those are some of the questions that we have to ask and take a look at, and to do that in-house, we just need a little bit of time to do that.
Yeah, the phase ones are reasonable, but the phase twos and so on can be quite expensive and eat into that, so. Sorry, anything else, Johnny, you wanted to add, or no, you're good? Okay, anything else? Counselor Kingma?
Yeah, the only reason I brought that up was I think costs just keep escalating. And that would be our trade-off. We're gonna pay more for a shop expansion if we do it a year later.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, yes, and no, because sometimes that stuff does come down. Like lumber and building projects, and sometimes it does come down.
Yeah, we've seen a shift since COVID, like,
Yeah.
we've been just looking at a sheet of plywood's come down, but I don't think it's back down to where it was before COVID yet either, so. Okay, those are all good comments to have. I mean, I think if we have a strat plan meeting at some point, those would be good items to add to the list to figure out a strategy, but once again, it'll be critical to get the data to make an informed decision. Counselor Morgan, sorry, go ahead.
Just to kind of commit to this conversation, Colt and I can put a staff report together in 2025, just outlining some of the questions that we have, the answers that we've been able to come up with, and just start to step towards essentially that greater concept of consolidation, or leave it at a decentralized model. So we'll walk through 2025, bring in more information to council.
Yeah, because either way, there's going to be costs, so yeah. Okay, anything else? Last call? Seeing none, we have a recommendation that the 2025 draft municipal budget presentation be received. And further, that the 2025 budget be considered for adoption at the December 23rd, 2024 special meeting of council. Moved by Councillor Kingma, second by Councillor Brody, all in favor, and that's carried. Yeah. Before I get into the recommendation of the bylaws, do we need to amend the bylaw 62 to reflect the 3.9, or that's already been addressed, or you can modify that, or, okay? For the wheelie bins, okay, just to acknowledge that. So with that addition, we have a recommendation that bylaw 53 of 2024, the Two Hill Drain 2024, receive third and final reading. Do you want a motion on that separately? Pardon me. Moved by Councillor Kingma, second by Councillor Nordoff. All those in favor, and that's carried. Further, we have a recommendation that bylaw 62 of 2024, the 2025 fees and charges with that amendment. Bylaw 63 of 2024, the zoning bylaw amendment for 2292 Murphy Drive. Bylaw 64 of 2024, the temporary use agreement for Daniel and Lindsay Fitzgerald. Bylaw 65 of 2024, the interim tax levy for 2025. And bylaw 66 of 2024, the temporary borrowing. And lastly, the bylaw 67 of 2024, confirming December 16th, 2024, received first, second, third, and final readings. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Counselor Kingma, seconded by Counselor McKinnon, all in favor, and that's carried. Yeah, I've been jumping around on the agenda here, but I think that's pretty well got it all. So could I have motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:49 PM? Moved by Counselor Nordoff, seconded by Counselor Brody, all in favor, and that's carried. Thank you.